Prime Minister Mark Carney there touting his government as one focused on affordability for Canadians. It's a topic on the agenda for his cabinet at their two-day planning forum in Quebec City. Carney and his ministers are receiving briefings during that planning session, including from Food Banks Canada's CEO, Kirstin Beardsley, pardon me. I spoke with her this afternoon right before she met with cabinet. Hi, Ms. Beardsley. Pleasure to welcome you to the program. Thank you so much for making the time for this conversation. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So you haven't yet presented to cabinet, but I'm wondering when you do, what your main message is, what you hope to tell them.
Well, what I'm coming with is the voices of the millions of folks across the country right now who are using food banks, as well as the thousands of folks who operate food banks. And we are sending a message that things are really hard right now for folks. We are seeing record levels of food bank use, 2.2 million visits in a single month currently right across Canada. And we need to see action in order to ensure that folks have what they need to have the essentials of life.
Before I get into kind of your suggestions on the action front, I think those numbers are worth taking a second look at. I know you've had a long involvement with the organization. To what degree have things, in your view, gotten worse?
It's shocking even to those of us in the field to see the numbers grow as they have. Since 2019, food bank use in Canada has doubled. These are community organizations that are showing up to make sure that their community members, their neighbors, are fed. We're seeing an increase across the board. Troubling numbers include the number of children. So a third of those using food banks are children. We're seeing an increase in single adults who tend not to be seen in legislative priorities. We're seeing an increase in seniors. And, you know, one of the troubling things that we're seeing is an increase in the number of people who are employed, who have jobs, who are now turning to the food banks across Canada.
And I remember you kind of sounding that alarm now for a few years, right? That this idea that people who are employed are still very, very much in need. What does that say to you?
It speaks to how vulnerable we are as a country. Now, we're talking a lot right now about the strength of Canada, making sure we build a strong future together. When you look at the numbers, we know that food insecurity has to be part of that plan forward. So when you have 24% of the population, or 25 rather, percent of the population, quarter of the population experiencing food insecurity, you can't build a strong Canada, a strong future. We need to address this issue if we want to address the other challenges that Canada is facing right now.
So that leads me into policy prescriptions, and ultimately cabinet is designed to be able to actually put forward those types of prescriptions. If you were to present, and I imagine you will, them with some proposals to actually address the problem as you see it, could you share with us what some of those would be?
Sure. So what I love most about Food Banks Canada and working with food banks is that we are solutions folks. We like to solve problems. So we come with the data. We know what we're seeing across the country, and it's so important that that voice is brought into the halls of power. But we also come with policy solutions and suggestions. So what some of the things we're proposing are the things that we have talked about in the past. Immediate relief for folks who can't afford groceries right now, a groceries and essentials benefit, a temporary measure to allow folks to be able to afford to go to the grocery store so they don't have to decide, am I going to pay my rent or feed my family this month? And then we're looking at long-term investments, making sure that life is affordable and that we have a social safety net that supports people over the long term. Things like making sure our EI system is modernized for today's workforce.
So the government, I think, if I understand my own questions to them and their responses, will probably say something along the lines for EI of, oh, we are in the process, or we've already enacted some modernizations to that system. And then they will also at times point to sort of the constrained fiscal environment they feel they're operating in, thanks to the economic crisis we face vis-a-vis the United States. What is your response to that? Like, what is the significance of what you hope they do against that backdrop?
So what I'm bringing, as I said, and I take it's a huge responsibility to bring these voices to government, but what we're seeing is also a crisis. 2.2 million visits to food banks every single month. Food banks cannot continue to absorb an ever-increasing number of folks who come to our doors. And if we look to the future, as I said, if we're looking to build a strong country, if we're looking to address all of the challenges we have in front of us, we have to look at food insecurity as one of the crises that need to be solved.
Do you think if some of the solutions you're proposing had been adopted earlier, the increase in usage, for example, that you pointed out at the start of this interview could have been countered or abated or lessened?
I mean, I think, yeah, it's hard to know what the past would have looked like. I know the trends that we were seeing is that we saw about a 30% growth in food bank use after the 2008 economic downturn. And it had plateaued right up leading into the pandemic. We were starting to see some positive news just as we headed into the pandemic. Food bank use was starting to come down. So I think there are ways we can look to the past and look to policy advances to tell us what impact those will have. But really right now what we're looking towards is the future and what we can do now to make sure that folks aren't left behind in the immediate term, and what we can do now so that there are long-term solutions so that we don't keep continuing to have this conversation year over year and see the increases that we're seeing.
Understood. Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note, Ms. Beardsley. Thanks very much for making the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.